The Books Podcast, presented by Tim Hague.
Welcome to Books Podcast. I'm Tim Hague. We are always happy to refer you to our back catalogue of author interviews, which is pretty impressive. You'll find Lord David Owen, Helen Lewis, Terry Pratchett, many, many more. Please subscribe now on your favourite podcast player, and as you know, it's free. And of course, please tell your friends. In this episode, we're very pleased to welcome back Joanne Harris.
Names are powerful things. If you can name something, you can control it. London is already a city of lairs. It's very easy to imagine another unseen lair with a link to the Fey world. You don't have to go long ago and far away to find a story. They are here everywhere. They're in the cobblestones, they're in the walls, they're in the faces of people.
I ask you, gentlemen of the jury, is this the kind of book you'd like your wives and servants to read?
Joanne, thank you for joining us on Books Podcast.
It's lovely to be back.
This new book, which is The Moonlight Market, it's unabashedly a fairy tale.
Absolutely, it's a fairy tale.
It starts off with a prologue that's literally a fairy tale, and it's concerning the Moth King and the butterfly. It's very authentic. You could have written fairy tales for a living and just that, couldn't you?
Well, I have written quite a lot. I mean, it's basically set in the same world as Honeycomb, and so that part, those sections are in the same voice and suggest a kind of affinity with those stories.
And of course, this fairy story is woven through the book. We come back to it at the beginning of every section, and the fairy tale, of course, leaks into what we think of as the real world, and as the book progresses, the leakage goes the other way. So we really have to start with what was it that happened between the Moth King and the Butterfly Queen?
Well, something very universal. A man and a woman who really don't belong together fall in love, and they think that they can live with each other's faults, but they are very different people. And she is very much of the day, she's very sociable, she's very bright, he is very much of the night, he is very introverted, he's quite grumpy. And they have a son who keeps them together for a time. And then through an act of accidental neglect, they lose him. And he finds his way, by magic, in fact, through the powers of the spider mage, who is their court mage and who is in love secretly with the butterfly queen. He finds his way into another world and is lost. Unfortunately, it's the worst world it could be. It's our world. and they can't find him and they don't know where he's gone. And it breaks their marriage. So it's an unhappy love story. It's actually a story about love in every possible form you can imagine. But it starts with an unhappy story of lost love and grief, and inevitably the rage that people who were once very much in love feel against each other when something has gone badly wrong and they don't want to blame themselves.
I'm going to come up against a problem I had last time I spoke with you, which is that you unfold your story so beautifully and with such care that it seems invidious to give anything away. I'm always worried about spoilers, so that's going to be your job.
Oh, that's right at the beginning. That's not a spoiler.
It's not, but we're going to have to talk about some of the things that we encounter in the course of the
book.
Where should we start? We can start with the character Tom Argent, or with the Moonlight. Let's start with Tom. Tom Argent. Tell me about him.
Well, Tom is really at the heart of everything. He is a flipped version of the fairy tale ingenue. He is the lost princess in the body of a young photographer living in King's Cross. King's Cross was an obvious choice because that's where I live, or at least that's where my little flat, my pied-à-terre in London is, and I know it well, and I've seen it change. And one of the things that struck me is that because it's a passing place, nobody really knows anybody here. Everybody is so focused on their own little concerns that there isn't much of a sense of what other people are doing. Tom Argent lives there. He lives above a little old-fashioned photography shop. And he's incredibly happy because he doesn't have much to do during the day except sit in his shop.
Because when you say old-fashioned photography shop, we're talking about old-fashioned cameras with films that you have to develop.
That's right, yes, he likes film.
It's an anachronism, but it's an anachronism that's embedded in for purpose into the story.
Well, yes, Tom's a bit of a hipster. He likes analogue technology, but also he is fascinated by the process of developing film. As a little boy, he was interested in fairy tales and magic, and he got it knocked out of him by his very practical parents. And so he has gone to the alchemy of developing film, and that to him is the magic of seeing, of taking a photograph, of capturing the moment, of developing it, and of not knowing quite how it's going to turn out. All these things fascinate him. He doesn't have any friends. He doesn't really know anybody. And so that is his life. And I envisioned him walking around King's Cross taking pictures of people, because people are really what interest him. Although he doesn't interact with them, he likes to capture their images and keep them for himself. And one day, very unexpectedly, a young woman comes into his shop and he falls in love with her.
And this
suspiciously
is a man of
fast.
29. He's never been in love.
No, he's never been in love.
Very clearly.
He doesn't even really believe that it exists or that it's for him. It hasn't been part of his world. But he falls hard for this young woman whose name is Vanessa. And much of the story is about his pursuit of her and who she is, because, of course, nobody in this story is quite what they seem to be.
Well, you say that. Tom is adopted. You mentioned his parents. Adopted is a red flag for a fairy tale.
Well, everybody in a fairy tale is adopted, no?
Well, isn't there a reason for that? There are so many orphans in fiction because people with parents have somebody to turn to.
That's right. He's completely alone. And he's looking for connection, but he doesn't even know that that's what he's looking for. In fact, there are lots of things that Tom needs. He's a bit of an ingénu in some ways. And he's also annoyingly clueless some of the time, like a lot of young men in love.
Very willful. Throughout the book, he never takes anybody's advice.
No, he doesn't. But then, have you ever known a 29-year-old who did?
Good point, well made.
And, of course, he's deeply, deeply in love and besotted by this girl who he doesn't know, but he's projected many, many things onto.
It's a coup de foudre, isn't it?
It really is, yes.
He's in love the moment he sees her.
Yes, and she is beautiful, but that's not what draws him. There is something else that draws him.
There's something else about her. He can't remember her face when she's not in front of him.
Well, this is true. There are lots of things Tom doesn't remember, but around Vanessa there is a kind of nebulousness. She changes her appearance. Her hair is never quite the same. Her face is never quite the same. She dresses differently. And none of those things have anything to do with her beauty. Her beauty is a kind of glamour that shines out of her. And this is what he's pursuing. He's literally a moth to a flame.
A phrase you actually use in the book.
I do, quite unironically.
One of the characters uses it more than once. I did like that at one point Tom says, I always felt there was something special about me. And then this spider mage, who we call Spider, he says, that's just human entitlement. That's nothing special. You're all like that. And
yes, I did want to subvert some of the tropes of the fairy tale, and the chosen one is one of those tropes that you see all the time. So I wanted to riff on that. I mean, there's a lot of sadness in this book, but it is, to me, primarily a comedy.
Let's move on to the Moonlight Market. Again, I'm going to throw this one in your court because it's wonderful and it's mysterious and it's exquisitely done. What can you tell me about it without spoiling the book for the reader?
Well, I wanted to write a story about a place that only came alive in certain circumstances. And I wanted to set it in an urban setting because a lot of this story is about how the camouflage of the fairy folk, which has always traditionally been a woodland camouflage, has come to the city. And so I created a market which only appears at the full moon, when there are no clouds in the sky. And it takes the form of the old London Bridge, which of course doesn't stand anymore and which is actually some distance away from the river in real life, but which crosses the river when it appears by moonlight. And it's a market that sells everything.
This is a real place that did exist. And the location, the locus is still there, of
yes,
course.
You can still see the sort of the works of it, although it's disappointingly small. And you realise that actually the Thames has moved. Which is why it's actually not on the Thames anymore. It's some distance away from the Thames. But in the dream world, when it appears, it is back there again, and it's real, and you can walk on it. And if you know how to get there, you can find it, and you can buy things, and it sells all kinds of magical things. But the currency isn't money, it is memory. And so people sell days, weeks, months, years of their experience to get these various magical artifacts which are kept and bartered and traded by the people who work there.
And so that you might visit the market and in certain circumstances not know that you had. And,
absolutely, yes. It depends what you trade. And you can trade fragments of your past life, if you like, or you can trade the last 24 hours. And it becomes clear that this is what Tom has done repeatedly. which is why he is surprised when he first goes to the market, in fact in pursuit of Vanessa, and realises that he is known there.
Everybody calls him the Collector. Why?
They call him the Collector partly because he wants to collect images, and this is forbidden. The market doesn't allow it. They don't like him to bring his camera. They don't like him to take photographs. If they do, they generally, if they see him doing it, they will take the film and destroy it and kick him out. And this has happened several times.
And he pays with his memories.
And he does, and they make him pay for them too. So he's come to the market many times, has tried to capture its wonder, has been kicked out many times and doesn't know it.
There's a conundrum here, isn't it? In many ways, Tom, and he's advised that he's better off not knowing. And yet he's desperate to know what the background is, and he's desperate about his lost memories. And I mean, isn't that a universal human? There are many things that we would be better off not knowing.
Oh, absolutely. But we always want to know.
But
don't we?
Every one of us would say, "No, tell me."
Absolutely. And even if you're going to regret it later, tell me now or regret it later. And so, yes, in exactly the same way that he is repeatedly told that Vanessa is dangerous and he needs to keep away from her, this just makes her more attractive. Because, of course, it does.
As one of the characters says, some stories aren't worth the candle.
Absolutely, and it's quite true. But no, Tom is dogged in his pursuit of his small glimpse of this world and of this woman who he feels is absolutely made for him.
Well, we've talked about Vanessa a little bit. There are two tribes of fairy folk. They're effectively fairy folk, but they're also lepidopterous, aren't they? They're moths and butterflies. So tell me about the tribes.
Well, the Moth King had his followers, and so did the Butterfly Queen. Eventually, after the disappearance of their son, these two factions, which are now separate and have no communication, no friendly communication with each other anymore, find their way into our world, and to start to hunt, to look for the lost prince. But it's too late. It's too much time has passed. He's gone, and so they settle down. And as sometimes butterflies and moths change their camouflage to suit different surroundings, they settle in the cities, which seem to be the best place for them to live, live among humans. And they both have discovered new ways to go unseen. The butterflies by being extraordinarily visible, which means that they mostly...
terribly glamorous.
Absolutely.
Which
gorgeous
means that, in the literal sense.
Absolutely, yes. Which means that people just ignore them and assume they're some special form of actor,
Yeah,
model,
yes.
or something like that. And the moths by going the other way, by looking drab and sad and homeless. And those are the people Londoners also ignore for reasons of perhaps guilt. And so they manage to coexist, and they have a very quiet war going on, whereby they struggle for dominance within their neighbourhoods. And, they both have places where they go to sleep and to feed, and they manage to find their way. And the moths mostly feed on the energy that they get from the butterflies, and the butterflies mostly feed on us.
But
humans.
that's an interesting thing as well. The more attractive the glittering tribe are, the more sinister.
Yes, they're basically very beautiful daylight vampires, whereas the moths are much more subversive, and they live in the tunnels under the city and in the underground, and they go largely unseen by anybody. But there is a war going on, which the human beings, which both tribes refer to as the sightless folk, because
we don't see them.
Because we don't see them, are blissfully unaware that anything's going on at all. Even when great battles are enacted, they don't see what's happening.
One of the characteristics of fairy stories is names are very important. There's a power in names.
I had a lot of fun with
and
the
you
names.
had have some fun now.
I had a lot of fun with the names because all the characters are basically named after butterflies and moths, and so so according to their tribe they are named. But also, and without giving too much of a spoiler, there is reference to a historic battle which happened during the late Victorian era, where various heroes fell. And I had to name the heroes, but I also had to look at the species that disappeared exactly at that time. And so I fell down a kind of internet rabbit hole of disappeared species. And so all of those names belong to that group. But no, I had a lot of fun leaving little Easter eggs for any lepidopterist who wants to.
Well, they're called things like cinnabar and brimstone and swallowtail and things like that.
There are some beautiful moth and butterfly names.
And there's something else, though, the power of names. Each of these characters has a daylight name and a nighttime name, in a way. And there's more power in the one that you don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, because these people are largely going unseen, except when they want to be seen, they hide their true names, as some humans do, in fact. They have names that they only use with their family and names that they use in public. So yes, the moths and the butterflies do this too. And so the true name is something that you only give to somebody who is of your people and who you trust.
And it gives somebody power over you.
Absolutely. Names are powerful things. In all my stories, in Honeycomb, there is a whole section about names and how if you can name something, you can control it, you can tame it, you can claim it. And so, yes, I wanted to continue that idea because although there are no actual magic words in this story, names are words of power.
How difficult is it to sustain a magical world overlaid on ours? I mean, this is a book. This is a book that's going to appeal much more to, say, enthusiasts of Ben Aronovich than Elizabeth Jane Howard. Isn't it? It's got these layers of existence, and it seems to me fantastically successful. But how hard is that to sustain, to make work?
I don't think it's all that hard. Because London is already a city of layers, so many historic layers and architectural layers and layers of perception, it's very easy to imagine another unseen layer with a link to the Fey world, places that only appear at certain times, places that used to be there but are no longer there, except the people who can find them. London has already these kind of hidden vibes, and it has so many stories of its own that it didn't seem tremendously difficult to me to kind of interleave another one into there.
I noticed that you've dedicated the book to the writer Christopher Fowler, who was a great friend of yours.
He was.
And lived here in King's Cross. And he was a friend of Books Podcast as well. We loved him to bits. And, of course, he died a couple of years ago. The reason I bring it up is that he would have loved that aspect. It's so up his street, that business of going and finding where the old London Bridge was, embedding the story in. We first meet Vanessa. Oh, no, we first meet most of them in the Champagne Bar at St Pancras Station.
That's right, yes.
And although this is not in any way a book similar to Chris's, I thought that sort of tying things was just a little bit of homage to him. Am I right?
Oh, it was. I mean, I've known Chris for, nearly 30 years, and he was the only person I knew in the book business when I first started off. And when I started to come to London, I would sometimes meet up with him, and he corresponded with me for many years, just ordinary old-fashioned letters, which he liked to write. And every time we were together, we would just walk around and he would tell me stories about London. He was full of them. He knew every detail. He knew about old gibbets and where murders had happened. And because I was a kind of innocent from the sticks and I didn't know London at all, he used to think it was hysterical that I got lost all the time and I took these long, circuitous routes when he knew all the little shortcuts. And he knew about rooftop gardens and he knew about underground plague pits. And I could so have used his help writing this book, I could. And I really missed him because I thought, I really want to run this past Chris and make sure that I've not missed anything. But I did my best to remember. And
like his books, yours makes me want to go down and find that little church where the old London Bridge stanchions were at one time.
That's right. It makes you want to discover things. It makes you want to be less focused on your own affairs and look around at the stories that are here all the time, because one of the things that I often feel about people writing fairy stories is that you don't have to go long ago and far away to find a story. They are here everywhere. They're in the cobblestones, they're in the walls, they're in the ruins of things, they're in the faces of people. We don't see these things, perhaps because there are so many of them, and perhaps also because we are all so very absorbed in our own business.
Oh, always looking at our phones.
Absolutely.
We said this was a love story. Well, it's more than one, isn't it? You said that yourself.
Oh, many love stories here.
It's not necessarily the love story that Tom thinks it is. Fairy tale love, though, is a different animal, isn't it, from sort of everyday, quotidian, conventional, human love. It's more like a drug.
Fairy tale love is something very particular in the fairy story. Usually it is love at first sight. Usually it's considered to be true love, even though the characters don't know each other, don't know anything about each other, and it is implied that it's going to last forever.
Oh, well, you say that. He's advised that he can have true love and certain death.
Ah, well, there's that too. That's a choice he has to make at one point. But no, in many ways, this story is a subversion of that trope. Because fairy tale love is this kind of impossible dream. And of course, Tom, who's never been in love, wants that. And he's been weaned on fairy stories, forbidden fairy stories. And he thinks that's possible. So it is about the love that's impossible, the love that lasts forever, the love that doesn't last forever, the love that you never saw but was under your nose all the time, the love that breaks you into a million pieces, possessive love, love born from the desire to control. There are elements of all of those in the book, and that they're all represented. So, in fact, in many ways, it's the first true love story I've ever written, because although I have written stories that had love stories in them, I've never written a story that was so centred around the love story, which is absolutely at the heart of this book. Well,
another thing you're actually well known for is using food as a way of unlocking character. In this book, it's more smells. You've gone in for evoking sort of heady, evocative litanies of smells that tie us in, that tell us where we are. And I noticed that this starts the moment. It doesn't happen at the beginning of the book. It starts the moment that Tom sort of meets the Moonlight market, when he encounters the magic really for the first time.
The sense of smell is interesting because people have a tendency to forget that it exists. They forget how many things are linked to it. It's linked very often to memory. It's linked to taste. People who lose their sense of smell, and quite a lot of people did over COVID, realise that food doesn't taste the same anymore. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it doesn't taste at all. The majority of people, when asked if they could choose to lose one sense, generally think that it's the sense of smell that they would miss least. But I'm not sure that's true. I think it is linked to many emotions and many memories, and we don't always realise. So this is the moment at which Tom starts to notice scents and what they mean to him. And because they're linked to memory, I wanted to make them part of the fairy world, because actually London is not a place of great smells a lot of the time.
Well, it's many smells, but not great ones, not attractive.
Yes, there are a lot
ones.
of drainy, unpleasant smells in London. And I wanted a kind of sensory link to another world, another level of experience. So scent was a good one to use, I think. And also I'm very drawn to scents. I always have been. In all my food books, ultimately, what I'm describing is mostly scents and feelings rather than tastes, which really only come in a handful of flavours. But scents, well, that can be anything. It can be a time, it can be a place, it can be a feeling.
And you really go for the full palette in this book.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I played around with that a lot too, because it's an intangible scent, and yet it's a very evocative one. You can do a lot of things with smell.
I understand that you intended this to be a novella, but then it turned into a full-scale novel.
Yes, I was going to write it as a novella to match my other novellas, although I realised when I was doing it that it was different. It's not based on a child ballad. It's not quite in the same narrative style. And I thought, maybe it's not a novella after all. And then I had a chat with my editor and she said, I'd really like you to do this as a novel. So I looked at it and thought, can it be expanded? And it could.
I'm not sure what you would have left out. No, because some novellas that have been expanded, you can tell. And you think,
I didn't want that.
I
didn't want that to happen. I wanted it to feel organic and natural.
Yeah.
I thought, well, I can certainly expand it, because it was already, even as a first draft, it was a long novella. So I thought, okay, we can do that. And I can put a little nod to the last novella, which was Orphea, which is also partly set in London. But yeah, this was a little bit more than that.
Well, we meet Orphea in in this book as well. And
We do. There's a little scene where you do meet her, although you're not quite sure whether it's before or after the Orfeo novella itself.
well, that leads me to the other question. Is there further mileage? Will we be meeting her again in any?
Quite possibly. A lot of the characters that I write have the potential to come back, have the potential to have different stories. And there might well be something else about Tom and Carissa and the butterflies and the moths, because I can see how that could continue. I just don't know if I'll get round to writing it or not, but it would be nice to. And there's been a lot of affection for those characters. So, yeah, I could see that.
Well, I would read it because I absolutely loved this book. I couldn't put it down. It was one of these that, I wound up reading in just like 2 days flat because I couldn't go away from it. I wanted to know. I wanted to turn the page.
I'm so glad it chimed with you.
Absolutely delighted. Joanne Harris, The Moonlight Market, is published by Glance at £22 and any minute now the paperback at £9.99. If you enjoyed this interview, please subscribe now on your favourite podcast player to be notified of upcoming episodes. As I say, subscribing is free. Joanne, thank you so much for talking to me about the Moonlight Market.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
That was the Books Podcast, presented by Tim Haig. Email Tim on tim@bookspodcast.com, Twitter @bookspodcast, and Facebook @bookspodcasttim.
Well, you made that very easy. Would you like another cup of tea?
Oh, yes, please. Yes, let me just...